Welcome, everyone. My name is Christina Chauvenet. I'm the Monitoring Evaluation and Learning Officer here at Newman's Own Foundation. Thank you for joining us for the final learning session of 2025. Kind of crazy that we're at the end of 2025. But we are excited to launch into this awesome learning session. We're going to learn about a new food literacy tool with you all. We can move to the next slide. And also, to that end, as we are transitioning into 2026, just a couple of reminders. We've had so much fun with you all this year and just learning with and from you all, like we're going to do today. If we could just go back to the last slide, Rachel, sorry. So, just a few reminders for the session today. Just keep yourself muted. Unless you have a question, you're welcome to come off mute. Moving forward, anyone from your organization welcome to join these sessions. They are limited to Newman's Own Foundation grantee partners, so we ask that you not circulate that externally. And we are going to be kicking off January with a highly requested learning session, which is a coffee chat where we'll have an opportunity to connect with each other as the new year gets going. So we're going to pop the registration for that in the chat and welcome you to sign up there. And also, per your feedback, we are going to have those in at a regular time so that you can plan better to attend those learning sessions. So we're going to have them on the third Wednesdays of each month. We'll be sending more information out about that later, but in the interim, invite you to sign up for our learning session that will be on January 21st. So we can move to the next slide. This is what we're going to be diving into today. I'm so excited to learn with you all about how academic partnerships can really bolster your evaluation capacity and this exciting food literacy tool that I think is going to be applicable to so many of your work settings. And we're also going to just look a little bit more in how those collaborative research models can really advance your impact. So we can move to the next slide. So just wanted to welcome our guest speakers today. We have Beth from FRESHFARM FoodPrints, a Newman's Own Foundation grantee partner in Washington, D.C. And I'll let her introduce herself a little more shortly, but she's going to be sharing the collaboration that she and FRESHFARM FoodPrints have developed with Christy St. Pierre, who is a PhD candidate in exercise physiology and applied nutrition at George Washington University. So we really want to thank them for being here to talk about how they developed and executed their partnership. And I will turn things over to them.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We're excited to have a conversation with you about our evaluation and research partnership. We thought we'd start with a little story about how we started working together that you can kind of probably see the through lines in our presentation. So I have been with the FoodPrints program for about 8 years, and I started before I was program director. I worked on communications and development and evaluation, and we did some in-house evaluation, and then we did some with a researcher, and we were kind of ready for something more and different. We had been doing some work with alumni, and the then program director reached out to the department chair, Jen Sachek, at GW, and she connected me with Christy. And we started exploring ideas about how to do research around alumni. And so all of this had grown from there, which was about 4 or 5 years ago. So it's been a very collaborative process and mutually beneficial. And we'll talk about that as we go. And just a quick intro to FRESHFARM FoodPrints. We're a food and garden education program in DC schools. We reach 8,000 students in 21 elementary schools, public schools in DC across the city. And our curriculum is embedded in schools and tied to academics. So I'll let Christy introduce herself now.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am glad to be here. I'm Christy St. Pierre. As Christina mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate at George Washington University, and the partnership with FoodPrints was also really serendipitous for me. But my major motivation for pursuing a PhD was really to be able to engage in community-based research. I've lived in DC for a long time and seen a lot of community-led initiatives to work toward food justice, and really saw an opportunity to play a role in generating evidence for that work and kind of helping support and expand that work that's being led by communities. And I have a background, I'm a registered dietitian as well. I have a background in child nutrition and school-based programming. So I knew of FoodPrints, and it just worked out really well that they were wanting to move in this direction as I was starting my PhD. So I'll hand it back over to Beth.
Okay, we're ready for next slide. Okay, we have three sections with to our presentation today. This is the first section around building research partnerships. So next slide. We wanted to talk about two different types of partnerships. The food literacy evaluation work that we did and that we'll present later on this meeting is an example of that second column, research with external data collection, where faculty and graduate student researchers helped us design and collect and analyze data, ran an application process for the institutional research board, both at the university and with the school district, and included publication of results in academic journals. So that kind of feels sometimes big and unattainable. So I also want to say that sort of where we sort of started was on the first column with some evaluation with internal data collection, which can happen without the goal of academic publication or an IRB approval. I worked with Christy and some other graduate students in her department to do some data collection and data analysis around other themes and for grant reporting. And those results can be used as evidence for funding and also sort of lead into this more research heavy type of evaluation that requires more funding and that kind of thing. So I don't want to scare you off that you don't have to do something big and IRB like in order to work with university partners. Okay, next slide. As Christy and I sort of talked about what we wanted to convey to you all about how to sort of replicate our partnership or like find one that is in the spirit of what we've built. The main message that we have is to find a mutually beneficial project to build evidence for your work. So, and our partnership, as we talked about, has evolved. So we started small and we sort of grew, and the research topics built on each other over time. The community-based group, which is our organization, our FoodPrints program, brings the trust and relationships with schools or community-based organizations or stakeholders in the community, whereas the universities bring that research expertise and the desire for that data and research grounded in the community, as Christy mentioned earlier. Next slide. And then it's just a little bit of advice about looking for university partners, types of departments or professors or faculty or grad students that are aligned with all of the work we're doing in food education and food justice as grantees. And then sort of the going into it with the intent to build a collaborative approach and build it together. So those are our bits of advice. Next slide. Okay, so each of these sections, we're at the end of the first section. We have a discussion question that we want to open up to the group. So you can hop off mute and ask a question or share your experience with evaluation or research partnerships or put it in the chat. We're just going to spend a few minutes if folks want to hop into the discussion at this point on that topic. But it's okay not to, too, because we'll have more time at the end for Q&A.
Beth, I can kick things off as somebody who's been on both sides of this partnership. I used to be in academia and have been in nonprofit research settings. One of the things that I think can be a challenge is when you're trying to align, for example, like your program evaluation timeline, and it feels like either the scope maybe is misaligned or the timeline, and it feels like it's going to be such a long time and you're feeling like you have deliverables that you need to get to before. So how would you kind of address that kind of scope and timeline piece?
Well, the timeline for big research projects is long. The IRB process, the approval process is long, but I think that this project that this food literacy project that we're talking about it was a 2-year study, and then it was conceptualized as a process evaluation,
Mm,
um, process and outcome evaluation project for our program as part of a federal grant around service learning and our program. So, not to say that there's a lot of those kind of grant opportunities right now, but like it was like a bigger, longer scope. But Christine,
mm,
I know you're asking about sort of a shorter piece. So that's where I would encourage folks to think about the smaller pieces where you can connect with grad students
mm,
to sort of build on some of the in-house evaluation you have or some good information that you have, and how else can we look at it, and
mm,
what are new ways to collect data or analyze that data and share it. And grad students are always looking for opportunities for capstone projects or class projects. So I would encourage folks to kind of start there if you have a shorter timeline, smaller budget, need for a deliverable sooner.
yeah. And Beth, you are coming from a setting, correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't have an in-house evaluation person at Fresh Farm, right?
Correct. I have learned so much by working with our research partners. So I feel like I'm able to work with Christy and with other grad students. It's something I've integrated into my job to be able to lead this on our end, but by no means am I an evaluation expert, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's great that you've been able to leverage that.
Yeah.
And yeah, Abby sharing in the chat that working with researchers to develop legislator specific fact sheets. Love that. That's a great way to
Yeah.
engage researchers as well.
Mhm.
Right. So that's a piece of using the evidence and the results that you have for communicating out to stakeholders and funders and advocates and folks that are really going to make things happen for you. So how do you do that translation piece and bolster that? Christy, did you want to add anything around from the university
Yeah,
perspective?
I think you covered it well. I mean, that is, being on well, I've been on both sides as well.
Yeah.
So that is just it is a challenge, but I think that, starting with smaller projects and then you're generating pilot data that, you have evidence they got to build on that. And I mean, I think personally for me, just being okay with taking the long view sometimes and to be like, it's okay that, it's moving at a slower pace sometimes that, for the bigger studies, but
Yeah. And also there's interim pieces that you can get in a longer
mhm.
study. So this 2-year evaluation, we had some data from the first year. And so I sort of captured that, and we did a one pager about those results. And we said it's this is an in process, but this is what we're seeing so far. And I presented that to our city council as we were advocating for funding. So you
Mm.
can use interim results as well.
Okay.
Okay, should
All
we
right.
go to
Yeah,
the
no,
next section?
all
Um,
right. So Beth mentioned that this evaluation was we conceptualized it as kind of a bigger outcome and process evaluation that was part of a grant project. But our main outcome that we were looking at was food literacy. And so we want to talk a little bit more about that today and kind of define what that is, give some framing for that and why it was the main outcome in this evaluation. You can go to the next slide. Um, so food literacy it's a complex concept, but it's recognizes that our food, starting kind of from our food choices, form our habitual eating patterns. And in this context, working with children, the patterns that are established in childhood tend to persist into adulthood. And food literacy is a concept that has kind of emerged over the last 10 to 15 years to try to capture those complex relationships between these many different factors that are driving food decisions. Include taste preferences and confidence, skills, knowledge, and motivation. Like all of those things contribute in ways and overlap in ways that are sometimes hard to define, but are indicators. The elements of food literacy then can indicate the potential for long-term food patterns. Um, but part of another issue with food literacy is a lot of the work initially was done in adult populations. And so then we're working with children. There's some key differences between adults and children and adolescents around food decisions. There's differences in developmental stage and children, especially like elementary children, very much just starting to develop like their critical thinking skills, and also just have limited agency over the food, what foods they can choose from what's available to them, and in different ways than adults tend to. And so at kind of the start of this project, our team did a deep dive into the academic literature to look at what does food literacy really mean in children and adolescents? What are the applicable dimensions like to this population that accounts for their developmental stage and their limited agency over food choices? And so through that, we identified these four central dimensions for children and adolescents. So there's purposeful engagement with food, valuing shared food experiences, food systems and nutrition knowledge, and confidence in everyday food skills. And I want to note, like the knowledge and skills, those definitions have been more developed, but we've seen on the research side that having knowledge or even having skills doesn't account fully for food behavior. So bringing in this that purposeful engagement with food and valuing shared food experiences are also important drivers. So then you can go to the next slide and I'll give a little bit of the definition for each dimension and some of the common indicators. And so these dimensions also apply for children, like through childhood and adolescence. So the indicators and how the level of like critical thinking or analysis like can change as children grow up. So the purposeful engagement with food is really about self-reflection around food behaviors and practices. And so some of the indicators for that are a willingness to try new foods or enjoying a variety of foods. And that's, something that develops throughout childhood, starts pretty narrow and tends to grow. Having just kind of sensory awareness with engaging with food, smells and tastes, and not just eating it. And enjoying learning about new foods. And so this is probably the most abstract of the dimensions. And like with the upper elementary age students, they're maybe they haven't maybe consciously thought about some of these things, but we found some ways to ask about them in ways that they could understand and respond to. Next slide. So valuing shared food experiences really gets at the social aspects of food. And we know that those are the social factors, engagement with family and friends around food have a big role in shaping food choices. But this also has been less often measured and maybe is a little harder to measure than knowledge-based questions or skill-based questions. But some of the indicators in this dimension would be valuing the experience of sharing meals and food with other people, participating in household food activities, having an appreciation for different cultural food practices, and then sharing food and nutrition information, talking about it with their family or with their friends, and to what extent are students doing that. And next slide. Food systems and nutrition knowledge. This is a broad, but covers really food from farm to the plate, and to health. So it can include food origins, how it grows, seasonality, how it gets to the table, to their plate. And as for older, like adolescents, could include more around like different food production practices and like thinking about sustainability in that. And then also making connections between food and nutrition and their own health. And as part of that, being able to find and discern like what is reliable food and nutrition information. All right, and next slide. And the fourth dimension is confidence in everyday food skills. So how they navigate preparing food and selecting food and being able to select food, making informed decisions in different settings that we're in, and then being able to handle food safely or use kitchen equipment, and follow recipes or prepare food autonomously. And that's developing as children are growing. And it's kind of a question is, do they feel like they can make food or help make food that they will enjoy and do that in a way like that the food is safe, that they're safe, and navigating a kitchen environment as they're growing in independence. All right, next slide. So those are the four dimensions. And we just wanted to highlight, both Beth and I mentioned this connection to food justice at the beginning, and approaching developing this tool, and really the concept of food literacy allows for this, and recognizing that children are coming from many different environments. There are many different historical and systemic factors at work that influence the food environment. And there's not one right way to eat healthfully, or, we wanted to not focus on like what is the right or wrong answer, but really center the children and their experiences. As part of this process, we tested items like with a wide range of fourth and fifth grade students to see how they were interpreting the wording, what their responses were. We built on examples that they gave and tried to make it familiar, but also applicable in different cultural settings, where this could be hopefully used in, at least within the US, in a wide variety of settings. And we really are taking that longer view of food behaviors. A lot of evaluation will look at, a program from start to finish. Was there a change in how much fruits or vegetables, students ate, but you don't really know like how long that's going to continue. And so we really wanted to see we could look at these factors that are associated with kind of longer term habit formation. All right, next slide. So thinking about, I know there's a lot of information on these dimensions, but as you're hearing some of those things, how do you see maybe some of these dimensions coming up in your work, or the ways that you have cited evidence of success, even if it maybe wasn't, using those exact terms, but what's resonant there?
I can try and share, but I know the sound on this system's not good. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hey, I'm Ana Lilia. Yeah,
Ana Lilia, remind us where you're calling from and what organization.
Hi, this is Ana Lilia. I'm from New York City. I'm calling from Community Food Advocates. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Youth Leadership. So there was a piece here just in terms of the food system stuff that makes me think of how we engage with our young people. So we work with high school students across New York City. And this is a very critical part of, intentional part of their initial training, to not just think about the food tray that they're getting at school, but to think about the entire food system and how it, so one of the activities that we do is like the story of food, and they pick out an item from their school food menu, and then I'll give them like 10 minutes or something to talk about how that got to their food tray, draw it out, sketch it out, or whatever. And then we start talking about the inputs and outputs into the entire food supply system, and then have deeper conversations about that. So yeah, like our goal is for them to understand the deeper workings of all of school food. So it's not as simple as, well, why can't they just serve us XYZ?
Mhm.
We talk about nutrition components, etc. So this all feels very relevant to our training.
Mhm.
Anne, yes, you have your hand up.
Hi, Kay Miller, the Montana Partnership to End Childhood Hunger, and I apologize if I'm foreshadowing the next part of the presentation, but I'm wondering if you are aware of nutrition education programs that have worked these dimensions into the nutrition education for students.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's part of, I guess, like on the research side, we're kind of defining these dimensions, and hopefully in ways that, where then they can be, um, the dimensions can be used across different settings. But I think, like
Got it.
FoodPrints does, their work aligns with these dimensions. A lot of, experiential food education programming really aligns with this. It is trying to give some like definition, and structure to that, and give some common parlance to it that can be, discussed. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
maybe
Thank you.
Yeah, Beth, maybe you can just share a little bit more about how food prints had like, sort of compared to, what some of us who maybe like got trained in public health grad school on a traditional nutrition ed class, and how food prints incorporate some of those other elements of food literacy from a tactile point of view.
Well, one of the bullet points earlier was the around the sensory exploration.
Mm.
I mean, it's just that is sort of the starting place. It's the experience with the food. So we our curriculum and our program model is around grow, cook, eat, and learn. So the kids are gardening and learning how food grows in the school garden, harvesting it, uh, bringing it into the teaching kitchen and making currently they're making like sweet potato quesadillas, right? They're harvesting sweet potatoes. Where does it come from? Grating it, shredding cheese, learning about how to cook it together and doing it as a shared experience. So our classes are around small group stations, and the kids cook and learn together. So that's part of that valuing shared experience of food and eating together and making together and being proud of it, and um, being more willing to try, eat, and accepting of it, right? If I make it and if my peers, made it for me. And then the learning tied to academics, so that's a piece that helps us be embedded in the schools, and use some of the school time. Um, but then students are really seeing cooking and gardening and learning about food and food systems as tied to real world work and real world concepts. So math and science and ELA. So it's embedded. It's not something different that you just do like in the kitchen, right? Um, and that really helps with the food systems piece, right? Where does food come from? We teach about the farmers. And then the approach to nutrition education is to not only let them know what nutrients these fruits and vegetables have, and that they're good for you and they help keep your body strong and help you feel good, but that they're experiencing the food throughout the year, throughout the seasons, and it's tasty and it's fun and it's enjoyable, and So they develop this relationship with the food that is sort of exciting, and they develop it rather than somebody telling them, right, it's good for you, you should eat it. Which I know a lot of us we're not there and have moved away from
Hey,
just
Julie's on
using that as
too.
a context. Right. So
Hey.
yeah. Um, so and we have a very non-pressured approach to eating in our classes too. They can try it or they can not try it. So even if they're cooking it and they're smelling it, then sort of that's might be a first step and they don't have to eat it at that time. So um I can share some more information about our program and our curriculum with Christina when she sends out the slides and everything. So
Yeah, I see a couple more questions bubbling up in the
great.
chat. I know that you might get to some of those questions in your next section. So why don't we move on to the next section? I will collect these wonderful questions, and if they are not answered in the next slides, we'll come back to those in the Q&A. How about that?
Okay, I see this question about collecting data. So,
Yeah, we'll
um,
come back to
yeah.
that.
Um,
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about the specific tool that we developed through this process. You can go to the next slide. So in designing the tool, we had that framework of these four dimensions in children and adolescents. And then our goals were really to have, an age appropriate tool that we were targeting upper elementary in DC, that's fourth and fifth grade. So kind of the 9 to 12-year-old age range. In terms of our partnership with FoodPrints, it was wanted to be very participatory and getting feedback from both, working with Beth and some of her team closely, but also working with the FoodPrints classroom teachers to get feedback who are, embedded or there with the students and have relationships with their schools, and their insights were really helpful as well. And we really hoped to have a tool that was enjoyable, or if not that, at least not feeling burdensome to students, where they're we didn't want it to feel like a standardized test or something that and we did get anecdotally some feedback when we collected after we did the surveys. Kids were like, "Oh, that was fun." So that was a win. But our design process, so we went, generated a sample of items that would capture each of these four dimensions and kind of the breadth of them, but also thinking very much about the attention span in this age group and making sure that it wasn't going to be too long and where they would just feel reluctant to even start it, thinking there's too many items. And then we decided to use a pictorial scale for the responses and used emojis. So it's the like or, from like strongly agree to strongly disagree, but instead of using the text, we use emojis that represent, and we have a screenshot of it coming up. And then we got review and feedback. Both I did a formal process with practitioners and researchers that reviewed the items and rated them and gave feedback. Actually saw a reviewer on here as well. That was one of the practitioner reviewers outside of FoodPrints. And then we did extensive pilot testing with fourth and fifth grade students as well. And you can go to the next slide. So what we came up with was the food literacy BITE tool. And so BITE is for building informed, thoughtful, and empowered eaters. That kind of captured what we were wanting to focus on in evaluating. And through this evaluation, we were also able to do on the statistical side, validate the tool, so we can say this is like a validated measure of food literacy, confirmed that those four dimensions that we identified were actually that was a reasonable model of food literacy, that the items we used were truly indicators of those dimensions, and that there is consistency among the items in each dimension so that they're all tapping into the same idea. And you have a screenshot of this is what it looked like. So it was kind of I-centered statements to students thinking about themselves, and then circling the emoji that represented how much they agreed or disagreed with that statement. And the emoji was really helpful because we could, in the instructions, we could say, if your reaction is this, like this is what you would choose. And so it really like resonated with that. And that helped I think increase the reliability of their responses. We can go to the next slide. But I'll hand it to Beth to talk a little more about some of the other components of the evaluation.
So we also paired this sort of with a qualitative data collection where we had the kids vote on program elements and do sort of a focus group, but we called it a conversation with them. We developed these little cards for the different elements of our program: gardening, cooking, teamwork, eating, and then the program overall, and had them vote, I love it, I like it, or it's not for me. And so then we were able to get percentages of kids that loved the gardening versus liked it. And then so, which we can now talk about as like the receptivity of the kids to the program. And we had high rates of enjoying the program, which and for ratings for these, so we'll show those in a minute. But these small group conversations might also be a tool that folks could use to explore some of these food literacy questions, right? If you're trying to get at how the kids are thinking about their behaviors or the things that Christy talked about around the dimensions. We just had small groups facilitated by Christy and her team, but you could do it as teachers or and asking kids 3 or 4 or 5 questions and recording their responses and sort of correlating those answers. So we asked things like, what did you like about the program? What would you change? Our big money question was, if you met a kid who had never been in FoodPrints before, what would you want to tell them? That really got a lot of great information about how they thought about the program and how they would explain it to other kids. And then implementation. So our goal was to integrate this into the program as much as possible. So in order for it to be doable, in order for us all to fit it in our schedule, we didn't have a lot of extra money, not a lot of extra time, just like everyone, right? So we administered these surveys and conversations as part of our FoodPrint sessions, and we did them as a station. So since we do small group station, the kids do 2 or 3 stations per class, we just set that up. So we didn't have to have an extra time that the kids came and to set that up with the classroom teacher or our teacher. So that and that really helped them, the students, feel like it wasn't something different, or they had to get used to the environment, or why am I going over here, right? They're already here and feeling comfortable and in the context. We did have a question about challenges. So this, I would say doing it as part of implementation is the way to go, but that does set up a challenge around scheduling. So since we did it with 4th and 5th graders, sometimes it was around the 5th graders, like last class of the year and last class of elementary school. So that created a little tension. We had to make sure the classes were long enough at the end of the school year to accommodate this. And we had six sites and 2 grades each and 3 classes each. So it's like a big scheduling matrix in order to get this much data. I noticed that on our staff of teachers, we had some varying levels of receptivity to the research, a little bit of skepticism in the first year. What are we measuring? Why are we measuring what kids are eating? Do we have to fit this into our classes? But once they saw that it was really integrated and that the results were really reinforcing what they're doing and helping show off what they were doing in their classroom with kids, we didn't get as much resistance the second year. And I think it was just we continued to educate and bring staff along. And there's always like the student challenge factor, like, are they on it that day? Is that day really crazy? Is that like, so that's not, but there was a question about the student data piece, and I'll let Christy talk about that too. But one piece that we've been able to that we were able to do is not to get student identifiers, but to do some anonymized data collection. And I wonder if that would help grant data permission to do surveys with kids if you weren't tying the data specifically to each kid. So that's one
Yeah, and
idea.
Christy, just to remind the context, recommendations for collecting data with school-age students when the institution doesn't allows program implementation but does not grant permission for data sharing, which I'm sure is something that many folks on this call can identify with.
Yeah, yeah. And it took, I mean, it took a full year to get an MOA signed between GW and the school district to be able to collect data. And so it is certainly something that comes up. But I think, yeah, we found that this process of making sure that it was anonymous, we're collecting at looking at the data at the classroom level. So there's no way that any individual responses could be tied back to a specific student. And then for us, any external sharing, we don't use like the school district's name or the school's name. And so just trying to keep that part, it's in DC as always say, but which if it's a smaller, more rural setting where there's only one school that, could be different. But I think even, internally, for an organization to be able to collect data and you have just like overall like percentages of scores, like this percent of students, we'll talk about this a little bit later too, but this percent of students strongly agreed, and you can share things like that aren't going to like that there's no privacy concerns about that.
Okay, let's run through the results really quickly.
All right.
All right.
So
go ahead, Christy.
all right. So in last school year, 24-25, we did these surveys with fourth and fifth grade students. There were 6 schools that were established FoodPrint schools. So that last school year was at least their 4th school year of having FoodPrints. And then there were 2 schools conveniently that started FoodPrints for the first time last school year. And so we did the surveys with all 8 schools to kind of be able to do some comparison with the established and the new schools. So what we found, you can go to the next slide. So we did see across the 8 schools together a significant increase in average food literacy scores, which is yay! Yeah, always it's exciting when you find that. And in particular, we saw an increase in the food systems and nutrition knowledge dimensions and the confidence in everyday food skills from the start of the school year to the end of the school year. And then in looking at those 2 groups, the established schools and the new schools, the established FoodPrint schools started out with a significantly higher average score in that valuing shared food experiences dimension compared to the new schools, and that stayed. That was the case when we did the follow-up surveys as well. And so that can kind of point to that this like repeated, year over year participation in FoodPrints can build that like that the value of those sharing food experiences over time. You can go to the next slide.
And then we've summarized some of this data as evidence for the FoodPrints program being able to create students who are informed about where their food comes from and have high levels of confidence around their skills and decisions. And that providing a basis of evidence for multi-year participation in the program as may having positive effect on this valuing shared food experiences dimension over time. So we as with any research, Christy and I and any of you who's working with researchers, right, we try to translate. There's the academic translation that she's doing for journal publication, and then there's like my tact of how am I going to put it in a 2-pager for my stakeholders and my funders and the city council, and so there's that layer of helping explain it too. But that the partnership, as much as working together for a long time, really helps do that as well. Like we can each explain our story a little better. And then next slide, I'm going to run through these really quickly. The receptivity on the voting was pointed to really high love liked parts of the program. Next slide. And then we had some you all know that quotes from students are some of the best evidence of our program success. So those are some of these that we got in the conversations. And these are really nice then to pair with the quantitative data too, right? To help provide some nuance for that. And then next slide, I think we are ready to, oh, Christy, go ahead.
Yeah, so just wanted to, talk about steps for using this tool. I mean, my hope in designing this is that it's something that could be useful and have practical applications, be useful for different organizations. So I think there were a couple of questions before. The specific age group for this tool really targets at 9 to 12 years, kind of late elementary school. But there's opportunities from these dimensions, I think, to develop tools for middle school students, high school students as well in the future. And then we talked about, you wanted to talk about a couple of options for use. So there's kind of that, internal data collection and showing what program participants are feeling at a specific point in time. So that's kind of that example I mentioned, 70% of students strongly agreed that they could, describe how an apple gets from the farm to their house, and so you have like kind of some specific things connecting to the program to share. And then more like a bigger external evaluation or research project, like it could be, designed for looking at changes over time, where you do like the surveys at 2 time points. So like we did in this evaluation at the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year, and then do some statistical analyses, like say here we do have evidence that there was an increase. So just wanted to note that I'm happy to talk to any of you more. My contact information is here and at the end as well. If you're interested in talking more about the tool and in adaptations, and when we were administering it, we translated it into Spanish. That was really the only additional language we needed. But I think having the emoji scale lends itself to that translation well, because like they're still kind of, they're not having to think about the words, but just the reaction. So yeah, that's a little bit about future uses of the tool, but want to give folks time if you have additional questions.
Thank you all so much for sharing this information, both like from the practicality of the partnership development all the way through to the the changes in food literacy. Because I think hopefully other folks on the call can see how that investment that Beth and her team at FoodPrints made in this partnership is now giving them fodder to show how the program is working and really supporting that program development. And one of the things I was just reflecting on listening to you all is if some folks I'm on this call might be like, gosh, that's like a lot to take on. I don't know that I'm ready to do that. I do think those pieces that Beth highlighted around some of those sorting, like it, love it, leave it, that's like a nice, easy way for you to dip your toes in some of this and do some data collection in real time as you ladder up to some of those bigger questions. So, or you have a longer lead time for program evaluation. I did want to just flag one question Lisa had asked earlier. How can, Beth, can you talk a little bit more about how Foodprints is embedded into the school curriculum? It is such a cool facet of your program.
Well, we're embedded in a couple ways. One, into the school itself and into the school day. So our teachers that Fresh Farm hires and employs and develops and trains and places are at our do programming 2 to 3 days a week at our partner schools. We have at most schools we have a dedicated classroom where the the classes come for 1.5 to 2 hours and have this experience. We talked about experiential learning earlier, where they're in the garden, they're cooking, they're learning, they're engaging with the content, and then at the end they're eating together. Um, and we've been successful in taking time during the school day because the lessons connect to academics. So we have a lesson called Measuring Math in the Garden. Kids are doing fractions and conversions as they're cooking, learning lots of scientific concepts, photosynthesis, soil health, that kind of thing. And then so that in that way it's part of the academic curriculum, um, and we've really and the children really enjoy it, right? There's just this high level of joy. The classroom, one of the other keys is the classroom teacher comes as well at most schools, and so they're bought in and they can use that content as an extension in their classroom. So
Thanks so much, Beth. And yeah, we'll share out these materials afterwards. And Christy and Beth have both kindly offered their contact information if you want to get in touch with them with more details. We have time for one more question if there's any other burning question folks have.
I had
Hi,
a
this
question,
is
Christy. Oh, go ahead.
no, you go first.
My question was just around in the lit review for this project, did you happen to come across any research linking food literacy to reduce levels of chronic disease over time? And if so, would you be willing to share those links with Christine to share with us?
Yeah, I'll look back through. I think, one of the challenges is like to really say that you need, like years of study and following
Right.
people, but there are some that have looked at food literacy and dietary intake and chronic disease. So I will get a list together. I'm happy to share those.
Thanks.